Hello, it's time for another video, and I am finally looking at a piece of music, not an original piece of music, as you can see, but this is just a little snippet of a Haydn minuet, one that I actually recently used in a music theory test, so I had it entered in, which was nice. And I want to just look at some basic ways that I might work with playback here. So what I've done when the camera wasn't rolling is I've actually set up a string quartet. So in my score manager, I selected Vienna Ensemble, and I have channels 1, 2, 3, and 4 Vienna Ensemble. That's where I'm hosting the instruments. And then in Vienna Ensemble, I've loaded 3 different matrices, one twice. So violin 1, it's similar to the matrix we were working in the other videos. Along my x-axis, nothing has changed. I have legato, sustain, détaché, staccato, pizz, tremolo. In my along the y-axis, tremolo, pizz are not used in this little excerpt, so they're the same. Staccato is also the same. Détaché is also the same. So I haven't done anything too fancy there. In the sustain patch, in the second slot of the y-axis, I've put in a sforzando sound. So here's sustain, and here's what sforzando sounds like. So there's a little bit of an oomph there. And that's something I think I might use in this. And then on the third row of the y-axis, I have my repeating. So I have repeat performance repetition legato under legato and sustain, and then performance repetition spiccato, because you recall in the special edition I only have a choice of legato and spiccato for the repeats. The pizz is the same, the tremolo is the same. I'm probably not going to vary that too much. I've set up all my matrices with velocity crossfade activated. And in the control map, you'll see I've set velocity crossfade to CC1 so that they're all going to work with the human playback dynamics, because I've set my human playback, again, this is just a little review, I've set my human playback preferences so that for dynamics, we're using CC1 plus velocity for attack. All right, and now we know that in Vienna instruments, it's kind of either or. So when I have, when I've got velocity crossfade activated, the velocity of a given note is not really going to make a difference. The only other thing I'll say about my setup is this time, rather than using the built-in algorithmic reverb that comes with Vienna instruments, I've used a reverb within, I've added a reverb to my mixer in Vienna Ensemble. I pushed this button, which added a new bus channel. My bus channel was here, and I added a reverb called Valhalla Vintage Verb. This is a good reverb that's available for 50 bucks. And if you don't have any external reverbs, I recommend, this is an algorithmic reverb. They also have something called Room, Valhalla Room. It's also 50 bucks. There are some other ones I like a lot that are pretty cheap. Liquid Sonics has a great convolution reverb. And there are tons of videos about reverb, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. But what I've done is I've set this to just a room mode, a very short decay time, 1.08 seconds. My mix, as you always do when you use reverb in a bus, I put it to 100%. And then I have each instrument I've sent to the reverb. And here you'll see I've used Vienna Ensemble's panning tool. I always recommend, if you pan in Vienna Ensemble, use this. This enables you to sort of sculpt the entirety of the sound to a specific place in the left-right spectrum. Whereas I believe that this actually, if I go all the way to the left, I would only be getting the left part of the channel, and this would be completely the right part. There would be an incomplete audio signal. So you can read more about that. You'll see I've set this up like a quartet with violin 1 all the way to the left, and violin 2 a little bit central, and viola a little more central, and then cello all the way to the right. And I've also done I've given violin 1 and cello slightly less reverb than you can see violin 2 and viola, just to, maybe a little bit to simulate the effect of them being a little bit closer to the audience. Okay, so that's what I've done. Let's see what this sounds like. This is just using the straight ahead human playback preferences that we set up before, so that the staccatos and legatos and all that stuff should play correctly. Let's see if that's what happens. Okay, and it's going to repeat. So this sounds okay to me. And again, if I'm just mocking something up quickly, that might be good enough. But there are some things I could do here. For one thing, you may notice that these hairpins, while they play back, they don't necessarily play back super in a super pronounced way. So I might decide I want more playback from the hairpin. So I'll go into Human Playback Preferences. And now if I click Dynamics, I have the option here to raise the emphasis. Let's raise it to something more extreme, let's say 80% or 90%. So we'll have really kind of more dramatic playback. So that in some ways might be better. But there are some other approaches we can take here. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here so you can see the whole thing. So let's think. You'll remember that in my instruments, the instrument we made together and the other ones I duplicated, I have in the third row my repeating samples, right? Performance, legato, repetitions, and spiccato. And I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch these to that. And the way I'm going to do that, you'll recall, I'll do it once the long way, which is go into the MIDI tool and choose continuous data and make sure I'm selecting 6, which is where I control my y-axis. And then I choose set to. And I'm going to set this to 100, let's say, because that'll definitely get me to that third row. But I also have a shortcut made for this in Keyboard Maestro, so I can select all of this, and just with my hotkey, I can push one button that gets me to set the y-axis to 100. These also should be repeated. And note, I'm only doing it to the repeating notes, right? I'm going to leave off the non-repeated notes. I'm going to do these two. And then I'm actually going to set this back because I don't want this. Although it won't really necessarily, oh no, it would matter because remember I have repeat in legato there. And back over here, I am going to make sure that this is all set back to the basic setting. And then here, these are all repeating, even though there's a rest between them. I'm going to set these all to 100. And I'm going to set the rest all back to 10, right? So I'm just navigating there when I do that along the y-axis. And let's watch let's watch the settings of the violin, and I may want to just make sure here, in case it gets stuck, that I make sure that this is set to 10, setting the y-axis back to the to the first row. And let's see what this looks like now in violin. And one thing I noticed in the violin is I don't think I set it back correctly there, right? I think I may have forgotten to put the 10 in there. It got stuck on repeated legato. You don't really want these to be played with the performance repetition legato patch. Let's listen one more time. There it goes. Okay, that's getting a little better. Another thing I might think about doing is going in. I might want a little bit more control over dynamics, and you'll remember that I talked about these staccato patches as being a place where you might not necessarily want to use velocity crossfade. Because it's really about the attack. And there are certain ways in which I have more control if I control this via velocity. So what I'm going to do actually is go to my matrix, and on all of the staccato sounds, I'm going to switch the velocity crossfade setting to off, only for the staccato patches, right? I'm going to just do this down the line. Now, I never use the second row's staccato, so it doesn't necessarily matter so much, but I'm just turning them off for all the staccatos just to be safe. And what this means is now it's going to be my job to set the velocity for those staccato notes, which is definitely creating more work for myself. And you may feel like you don't have time to do this kind of work, depending on the context of what you're working on. So let's listen to this now. And you'll notice there's no dynamic change now being created by that, that crescendo during the staccato notes. So we're simply not hearing those crescendi because I have to go in and decide what it's going to be. And I might say, you know what? I'm going to scale this. So again, I'll do it once the long way. I'll go to select key velocities, and I'm going to choose scale, which means what's my starting number. And I'm going to start at like 40 and go up to, say, 94 for a kind of a dramatic increase. And now I can do that here just with my shortcut. I have a shortcut for scaling velocity, and I'm going to do 40, say, to 93. And here I'll do maybe 40 to 70 because we're not done with the crescendo there, 40 to 70. And then these maybe I want them to be like 96, all of them. So I'm going to do set velocity to 96. Again, that's a shortcut. And these two, once it's not there, the dynamic is going to take over. So this is a little bit of trial and error. And here I'm going to set this one to 94, and I'm not going to worry here. And here I'm going to scale all of this from like 64 to 20. I'm going to go real quiet, and then from here, this crescendo, I'm going to scale everything from like 20 to say 95, and then here these velocities, I'm going to let's just set them at say 95, and 95. All right, let's see what this sounds like now. All right, I kind of like that. Now another thing I can do when I'm working with velocity is I can randomize. So once I've scaled it, what I might want to do now, so that not everything is perfect and together and doing the same thing, is select these together. And again, I'm only looking at staccato ones now. So I'm going to choose all of these, and I'm going to do the MIDI tool. I'm going to choose key velocities and randomize. And then you can randomize the key velocities, but limit the change to 10 values. So I think that's reasonable. And of course, I have a shortcut that does this with one button, randomizes to 10. So there's that. I've got these I can do. Ooh, no, I hit the wrong one. That was set to Y. I'm going to randomize there. And it didn't. Sometimes I get this error with Keyboard Maestro, so I'm just going to go in and do it manually. We'll see something you can go away now. Okay, and here too. So when I click randomize, it's taking my original values that I set, and it's going to randomize them. So if I go in and look to see here what I get, you see I don't get exact sort of until 8 when I didn't, remember measure 8 I didn't mess this up. But here, when I go down, I won't have exactly the same curve in each instrument because they're all a little bit random. And I kind of like that. I think that's going to give it a nice effect. Let's hear what that does. Another thing I might do is I might decide, you know what, I want this attack to be a sforzato. Even though it's not marked that way, that might be the best sound for it. So I'm going to select all of this. And remember, that's on all my instruments, that's in the second row of the y-axis. So I'm going to set the y-axis here to 60. And I'm going to make sure to set it right back here. I'll make sure to get this next attack to 10, so it doesn't stay there. And let's see, another place I might want a little emphasis, even though it's not necessarily there. And by the way, I'm going to add a dynamic here. I don't know why there isn't one, but that will make a difference. I'm going to add a little switch to sforzato here. Now, I don't know if this is going to be détaché or if this is going to be just sustain. And what I can do is I can move this over to the détaché too by hitting Control drag to make sure that whichever one Finale decides to use here, when it goes to my B axis in this instant, I'm going to get what I want. And you'll notice that I do tend to make matrices specific to what I know I'm going to need to do in a given piece. So I'm going to put this back up to 60, and we'll just make sure that, you know, over here maybe we'll set it back to 10 so we don't get stuck. All right, so that's a couple more changes. Let's see what that does. All right, and now we're beginning to have something that sounds kind of pretty musical. The only other thing I might do is say, even though there's no dynamic here, I might want there to be some sort of a swell. We're forte, you know, so maybe we're going to go in the first half of this bar. I'm going to scale my modulation now. I have a shortcut for that, right? And I'll just show you the long way to do this is MIDI control, continuous data, choose 1, and then choose scale, right? That's what I'm doing there. I'm going to scale this from like 80 to 120. And then for the second half, I'm going to go from 120 way down to like 50, let's say, because I think we started pretty soft. Let's do, and this is all trial and error to get this right. You know, let's go from 120 down to 50. And I might, you know, I might decide to do a different one in the, I'm just doing this quickly, viola 2 and violin. Let's see if that makes a difference now. So that's where I'm going to probably leave off right now. You get the idea. Now I'm working with the special edition patches. If I were working with the full strings, here are, just to give you an idea, like what the solo strings are like. Here's a violin solo. These are all different categories of notes that I could put into my matrix. So I have staccato and détaché short and détaché long with vibrato and long with no vibrato and sustained vibrato espressivo and sustained no vibrato. Now, if you think about previous videos where I talked about the slot crossfade, I might use a lot of these in my second slot and then use my my slot crossfader, this thing, to go between, say, vibrato and no vibrato, or vibrato and espressivo, or different length notes, etc. And it just is all a question of how much realism I want to put into the MIDI. If you're working on a big piece, you probably don't have time necessarily, but some of these things you can get pretty quick at. For instance, these repeated notes, I'm pretty quick with my keystrokes of just getting these to switch over to the performance repetition patches in Vienna. And you can see also in the full version, if you ever upgrade their performance repetition, there are a lot more, right? There's slow legato and fast legato and bowed slow and bowed fast and just all kinds of staccato and spiccato. There's harsh, which is another kind of cool thing. So there's a lot of variety possible, and if you learn just how to control these things using controllers, using Keyboard Maestro shortcuts, it becomes very powerful. So that's all for now.